SANDHAN, All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.
વિકસે વિલસે સૌનું જ્ઞાન, ચાલો રહીએ સૌ સંધાન. Welcome to Sandhan. Under Life Enrichment Program of Sandhan, we have today with us Andrew Cohen. We are highly privileged to have him again in this classroom. Well, it will be not fair to talk about benefits of spirituality given the complex modern lives. Sometimes it's our only hope. So today we will have benefit of having Andrew Cohen here with us, leading spiritual guru, who's going to talk with us about some of the key aspect of individual's journey in this area. Let me give a brief introduction of Andrew Cohen, a spiritual teacher, cultural revolutionary, independent thinker are all phrases that are synonymous to Andrew Cohen. Today he is known as leading spiritual teacher and writer with his insightful books that he has written, lectures and retreats all around the world, and part of his non-profit work Enlightenment Next. With the same title, they have a magazine as well with wide circulation. In his essence, you'll find a deep yearning for understanding ourselves and lifetime dedicated to sadhana. That is something you can tell through his commanding presence. I wouldn't take very long time on this, and let's start with our conversation with Andrew. Welcome, Andrew.
Hello, good
It's
morning.
our privilege to have you here.
It's my pleasure.
Andrew, please tell us a little bit about your spiritual journey of evolutionary enlightenment.
About my journey. You mean you want to hear about a little bit of my life story?
Yes.
My life story? Okay. I mean how this happened to me, how I ended up being here with you today?
Exactly, yes. Because our audience will be very curious about it.
So, I'm American. I'm from New York City. And I was brought up in a Jewish family. But it was a secular family, so there was no religious practice, there was no religious faith, there was no religious belief. And then, for some reason, when I was a teenager, when I was 16 years old, like many young people, one evening I had spontaneously I had a spiritual experience. I had a spiritual experience that's called cosmic consciousness. So I was sitting up late one night, having a conversation with my mother. And the doors of perception opened. And I suddenly had an experience where I became aware of the whole universe. And I know something like that's very hard to understand. But I had an experience where everything disappeared and I became aware of beginninglessness and endlessness. I became aware of the entire universe that was infinite. The nature of that which the nature of that which was infinite was a kind of overwhelming love and ecstasy and joy that was so powerful, that was so intense, it was so strong that I felt physically overwhelmed by the experience. I thought I was going to die if the intensity of the feeling didn't stop. In that few moments that I had this kind of experience, it was obvious to me that there was no such thing as death. And I also realized something very unusual, that no matter where I went in the world, in the universe, I would always be in exactly the same place. That no matter where I went, I would always be in exactly the same place. That I'd always be in the very center of everything. So that was my introduction, really, when I was a very young person. And then when I was a young man, when I was 22, I became a seeker, a spiritual seeker, because I wanted to rediscover the bliss and the freedom of this original experience. And so I did all the things that seekers do. I started reading spiritual books. I learned how to meditate. I went to see different kinds of spiritual masters. I had very different teachers myself. And then when I was 27 years old, I came to, like many Westerners, I came to India seeking for enlightenment. And then after 2.5 years here, I met a teacher, the great H.W.L. Punja. He's known as Papaji or Punjaji. That he was a disciple of the great 20th century sage Ramana Maharshi, and I spent 3 weeks in his company, in his presence. And when I met him, he was very unknown. There was nobody with him. The 3 weeks with him changed my life really forever. He had a very powerful transmission of his own awakening through the meeting with his own master, and the time I spent with him changed me in the most extraordinary way. And really, what happened is very shortly after I left him, I became a teacher myself. He said, "Now I've taught you everything I know. I want you to be a teacher yourself." And that was 26 years ago.
I think all that you're saying is very profound, and again, it's a field of experiencing. Words don't do justice to this kind of experience.
The experience is everything. The experience is everything. The experiences of going beyond the mind. That's fundamentally the experience of enlightenment is an experience of completely going beyond the conditioned mind. It's when you suddenly see your own experience and the whole world, right, from a place that utterly transcends or goes beyond the lens or the filter through which we see everything. So we tend to see all of reality through the filter of the conditioned mind and conditioned thinking. And when we have these kinds of experiences, the mind disappears, and it's like it's a leap from a relative experience, a relative perspective, to an experience and a perspective that is non-relative, that's absolute. It's the awakening to and the direct experience of the infinite.
I think that resonates well with me. Our friends would also know that one of the other, big Indian sage of last century, J. Krishnamurti, said that it's all about rising above our programming mind.
Yes.
The program that our mind is born with. It's all about rising above that. So please tell us that the method through which you got your enlightenment, following the Vedantic discipline and seeing world as illusion or transcendental aspect of the whole thing, while you have currently parted with it. So how it is different from that line?
Well, the message I received from my own teacher was that the world is an illusion, the world is unreal, consciousness alone is real. So after I became a teacher myself, it was my understanding that in fact the world, right, the world, the entire universe, the whole manifest universe comes from emptiness, comes from nothingness. And in the traditional experience of the Vedantic enlightenment is the awakening to or the discovery of Brahman, right? Brahman is the ground of all things. It is not anything in particular, but we call Brahman is the empty, timeless, formless ground of all reality. Brahman is the empty, timeless, formless ground or substratum of time and space of the entire universe of everything. And so traditionally in the experience of enlightenment is that we are, all we see is the world of time and space and form and mind and body and world. And when we have an experience of Brahman consciousness, all those things disappear, and we awaken to and have a direct experience of the substratum of all of reality, which is timeless, formless, beginningless, and endless. And we simultaneously realize that who I am, who you are, who we all are, is in fact timeless, formless, beginningless, and endless. So when I became a teacher, it was my understanding, my recognition, my realization that time and space, form, world, and mind, right, with the creation of the universe, emerged from timelessness. So time came from timelessness. Form came from formlessness. Right? The world came from emptiness. And so in that realization, I had an understanding of what the Buddha was speaking about, because the Buddha made the famous declaration when he gave the Heart Sutra. He said, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. He said the form is emptiness and emptiness is form, which means the world is one with the timeless ground of emptiness, and emptiness is the world. They're one and not two. So from that understanding, I realized that the world is also real. The world is also Brahman. The world is also God. So for that reason, I began to embrace the world, embrace the human experience as a manifestation, an expression of Brahman, an expression of God, and was no longer trying to transcend it or be liberated from it in the way that many of the traditional Vedantins try and do. They want to win freedom from or liberation from the mind, from the body, from time, and from the world. And I realized because the world is one with the timeless, formless Brahman, that God is here in the world as us, if only we have the eyes to recognize it.
It's all sounding fantastic and paradoxical at the same time.
Very paradoxical.
So let me
but
ask you something.
The nature of ultimate truth is always paradoxical. That's the nature of ultimate truth, absolute truth, is always paradoxical.
So let me, since you're mentioning all this, and India being predominantly Hindu countries, and most of our students would have come across this as, the schools of Vedanta. Does it relate to any of that, the Advait or Dvait, like, duality or no duality? So are you for the, any of that side, that it's all one, there is no duality?
I embrace both Advaita, which is non-duality.
Mm-hmm.
Non-duality would tell us what I was just saying, that form and emptiness, time and timelessness, form and formlessness are one and not two. So Advaita says there's only one and not two. So I this is my experience, and this is what I believe, and this is what I preach. But I also am an advocate of Dvaita, which is that there is an absolute reality, right, and there's a relative reality, and they're both real. Okay, so we have to honor both. And I also believe the world is relatively real. It's also real, is relatively real, and as I was saying, that has to be honored and respected, as also the world is an expression of the divine in manifestation. And I also feel that because we're human beings, because we're incarnated human beings, learning how to fully embrace the world, the human experience exists in the world. So if we learn how to recognize that the world is Brahman, the world is God, it will enable us to fully and wholeheartedly embrace the human experience and embrace the world of time and space in which we're living. And this is a response to the traditional Eastern notion that says that moksha, or liberation or enlightenment, means finding a way to transcend the world, transcend the body, transcend the mind, go beyond the world, go beyond the mind, and ultimately, they say, to be a liberated person means you never have to come back here. And I think this way of thinking is outdated, because in my thinking, it has taken the universe about 14 billion years of creative work to make it possible for human beings with complex minds to enter into this process. It's taken the universe a long time, 14 billion years. And from an evolutionary point of view, and this is what I'm very much interested in, is the evolution of the cosmos, the evolution of life, the evolution of consciousness and culture. From an evolutionary point of view, we can say that the universe, and this is a kind of a complex idea, that the universe is only beginning to become conscious because human beings are only beginning to become conscious of the entire creative process. Human beings have only recently gained the capacity to become conscious or aware of the entire creative process. And when human beings become conscious of the entire creative process, God, or Brahman, who created the world, also gains the power to be aware of the creative process. In the traditional ideas of Brahman, we believe, we imagine, we have a fantasy or a picture in our minds that God is a divine being who exists outside or beyond the process that he or she created, separate from it. But when we embrace a new kind of evolutionary orientation to life and to creation, we realize that God or Brahman is one with and inherent in the creative process that he or she gave rise to. So Brahman is the world and is inherent in the world, right? And the way that Brahman gains the capacity to recognize and awaken and to know him or herself is when a human being gains the capacity to recognize these deeper dimensions of reality, can experience these higher and deeper states of consciousness, can recognize these truths. Brahman has that experience at the same time. Brahman is not a being that exists outside the process, that's separate from the process. Brahman is inherent in the process, and when we realize that truth, then what we're calling Brahman realizes it at the same time. And this is a different way of understanding what the great traditions tell us, because the great traditions tell us that these higher states and higher perspectives pre-exist, but in a new way of this is a little bit complex, but anyway, in a new way of understanding these truths, that these states and these truths co-arise, simultaneously arise, as the sentient being reaches a point in their own development when they can begin to realize them or grasp them.
So I understand you advocating for the view that somehow we as humanity, we are ready for that evolution at a different scale.
Well, very much so, but the simple point here, which is important, is that God is, Brahman is evolution. Evolution is the creative process. The creative process is what caused something to come from nothing 14 billion years ago, what caused the Big Bang to happen, what caused the universe to exist, what's causing the universe to exist is Brahman, is God. Human beings aren't separate from Brahman. Brahman is the creative process. Brahman is evolution, which means you are and I am evolution itself. But what's different about human beings is that because of our complex consciousness, if we have a very big brain and complex consciousness, we have the capacity to awaken to become enlightened, to know that I am Brahman, I am the energy and intelligence that created the universe, that's creating the universe. I am that. I am the creative process, awakening to itself and becoming conscious of itself in the form of the body, mind, and personality of Jolly, or the body, mind, personality of Andrew. I am the energy and intelligence that created the universe in the form of the body, mind, personality of Jolly or of Andrew, which means I am Brahman. But this is not the passive Brahman. This is the active Brahman. I am the creator. You are the creator. So it means that this is your female Indian body and mind, my American male Indian body and mind, is an appearance or is an external form through which Brahman, or the energy and intelligence that created the universe, engages with the process that it created. I, as the creator, can only consciously engage with the process that I created through the highly evolved and complex consciousness of a human being. So therefore, to be human is everything, because a dog, a cat, a bird, a snake, a butterfly, and an elephant doesn't have the capacity to engage with the creative process with as much consciousness and self-awareness and perspective as a human being. So therefore, being a human being in this way of understanding is the most important thing. Because if a human being has the enlightenment experience, has the awakening, then he or she knows I am God. But the difference here is not the passive Brahman, right, which is the traditional Vedantic definition, is I am Brahman, I am that. It means the unborn, the uncreated, timeless, formless Brahman. In this new definition, we're saying I am that, but I am also the active Brahman, I'm the energy and intelligence that created the universe and is creating the universe in the form of the body, mind, personality of myself. I am the creator. And for a human being in the 21st century, this new enlightenment, knowing I am the creator, I'm the energy and intelligence that created the universe in the form of myself, can empower us spiritually, right? Like nothing else can. We because knowing that you are spirit in the form of the creator spiritually empowers us, spiritually energizes us to be able to have a kind of creative impact on the world that otherwise we wouldn't be able to do.
That's very interesting. And while you were saying that, Sanskrit quote came in my mind, Aham Brahmasmi, but you are saying go
that.
beyond that and say you are active. You are the one doing it.
Well, we're just adding. We're saying that I am that has meant traditionally, I am the passive, silent. I am Brahman, the passive, silent witness and observer of all things. I am not. I'm not the doer. I'm the observer. I don't do anything. I'm just observing everything. Right? Brahman is the detached, primordial consciousness that sees, but that's free from creations, free from activity, right? Unborn, undying, free from birth and death, uninvolved, not engaged, free from. So we're saying this is one dimension of Brahman, but the other dimension of Brahman is creative and active and fully engaged. Because who created the universe? The only being who could create the universe would be God. God is Brahman. Brahman created the universe. Brahman created the world. Brahman created the entire creative process. Brahman is the entire creative process. And I believe that in the 21st century, this active manifestation and expression of Brahman is a more relevant experience of Brahman, interpretation of Brahman, for the reality of the lives that we're living, than merely the awakening to the Brahman who's disengaged and free from the creative process.
That's again very profound thought, because then that gives a lot of answers to the conflicts a lot of people we face today, that if that's ultimate reality, then what about this?
Exactly.
Because we know this, we don't know about that, what it is.
Right.
So how to engage with this one, what we see.
So what we say now is that this is also ultimate reality. we say that.
So we should try to make this as best as possible, while not think about.
Well, the thing is, if imagine that you're God. Imagine that you're God and that you decided to create the universe. And you did.
And we do create every day with human interventions, we do.
Right, but if you were God and you created the universe, how would you feel about your creation? You'd feel very invested in its development. The way a mother feels about
Exactly.
when she gives birth to a small child, she feels very invested in the health and the well-being and the development of the small child. So if you were God and you created the universe and you created the world and you created human beings and you created life and consciousness and culture, you'd be very invested in where it was going.
Well, you have a huge stake in that then.
You would have, if you were God, you'd actually have an absolute, this is the difference, you'd have an absolute stake in it.
Yeah.
And even more, to take it to non-duality, not only would you have an absolute stake in it, but it also is you. But it's the you who can develop and grow and become. The active Brahman, the passive Brahman, can't develop.
It's going to be an observer only.
Right, there's no development. But this is the part of you that can develop, that can evolve. So if you were the active Brahman, you would be so invested in the part of yourself that can develop and can evolve. And that would be, and if you expand it to include the whole universe, it would not only be life in our world, but it would be life all through the complex universe. You'd be completely invested in the developmental potential inherent in the creative process. That would be the most exciting thing for you, because from looking at the traditional point of view, we could say that as Brahman, you have already been doing nothing for eternity. Right? You've already been doing nothing for eternity. So this creative process is a new adventure for you. You've been doing nothing for eternity. Now you've actually started doing something, so your attention would be fully engaged in it and fully invested in the outcome.
So just getting a bit deeper into that, you already given background. I'm sure students have the question that, so why you needed to come up with something different, well established, where a lot of people had enlightenment following the moksha path, the transcendental path. Why did you see the need for a separate path?
Well, no, I don't see this as a separate path. I see this as a developmental step forward, which includes what has come before. It includes it, but I'm adding another step.
Okay.
So the reason why we need a new piece to the puzzle is because the great seers and the great rishis, right, who had these original experiences, did not know that the world was evolving. For them, the world was static and unchanging. So now we know that we're actually part of a developmental process that had a beginning and that's actually going somewhere new. Right? In the old way of thinking, the entire cosmos was an expansion and a contraction, an expansion and a contraction, an expansion and a contraction. So everything was repeating. Everything that came before was always endlessly repeating itself over and over and over again. Okay. So if we know that time goes in circles or in cycles, if there's a constant expansion and contraction, if the same thing is happening all over again, we have a certain conception of time and of existence that's repetitive and predictable. But if we realize now that in fact time is a linear process and not a cyclical process, that we have to, if this is true, that time, for example, the universe had a beginning, in this case 14 billion years ago, the earth came into existence 5 billion years ago, life emerged 4 billion years ago, the human consciousness and culture, the mind, only emerged around 50 or 100,000 years ago, and we begin to see this, we realize that we're part of a process that's going somewhere new. We're part of a process that's going somewhere new. We're part of a developmental process that's going somewhere new. So the ancients didn't know this. Mm-hmm. So because of this, we need to reconfigure our metaphysics, our spirituality, in order to conform with the discoveries that science is making about the nature of the universe and the developmental process that we're all a part of.
Well, again, it's a completely new realm for most of us. So going back to basic, what would be your message to students if they are asking that why we should engage in this evolutionary enlightenment? Because whether you subscribe or not, you're part of it. Yeah. But
well, we're part of the evolutionary process.
Yes.
We're all part of it. Well, I think for students, I mean, and I've been saying this all over India, the thing for students is to think deeply about who I am and what I'm doing. All students, all old people, but all young people, all human beings need to ask the question, who am I? Why am I here? What's the purpose of my life? What's the purpose of existence? And they should be asking the big questions, is why did something come from nothing? Why did something come from nothing? Why does the universe exist? What's the point of all this? Because too many students don't question why. A lot of students want to get good grades so they can go to a good graduate school, so they can get a good job, so they can get married, so they can have children, so their children can get a good education, so children can get a good job, so they can get married, and go on and on and on. And the question is why? Why are we doing what we're doing? Why is any of us making the choice to do what we do? And too many young people are merely living according to the thoughts of their parents or their teachers to other people. We're merely just following what other people tell us. We don't think our own thoughts. We don't live our own lives. So I want to encourage all the young people listening to have the courage to question, why? Who am I? Why am I here? What is the purpose of existence? Why did something come from nothing? What is how do I make sense out of the experience of being human? And what is the most meaningful way for me to live this precious human birth? And I think not enough human beings, and certainly not enough young people, struggle with these kind of questions. We just kind of go along. We meander along, We just meander through and believing what other people tell us we should do instead of finding out for ourselves what the right way actually is.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate at this point, and
Please do.
I'll say that
I'm not afraid of the devil.
So I'll say that if I can live my whole life, not asking those uncomfortable questions, what's wrong with that?
They're not uncomfortable questions. They're exciting questions.
So why this question in the first place? That why seeking? Why enlightenment?
Because when you ask these questions and you're very serious about it, you can have an awakening. An awakening is the most powerful experience a human being can have, and that is the direct experiential recognition or discovery of an absolute, non-relative truth, dimension, reality. It's like you come face to face with God, so to speak, with the absolute, with the infinite. And when that happens, it changes everything. It just absolutely changes everything, because you have an experience, you actually have a direct experience of that which is ultimate, that which is not relative, but that which is ultimate. And when you come to face with it, it relieves you of doubt and fear, division and ambivalence. It changes everything. It changes everything. It sets your heart and your mind completely free. And to be an enlightened person, the knowledge of the absolute, of the freedom and liberation of the absolute, becomes a foundation from which you can live a life that of creativity and freedom. Does that make sense?
That does, totally, to me, and I hope to our students as well. So this was going to be my next question after a different one, but I'll jump to the fifth question instead, fourth one, because we talked about your message to student about the independent awakening and thinking independently. Coming from India, it took me a good while to rise to the level where I really understand what is independent thinking and critical thinking, because the family setup, the colonial past, everything discourages people to have independent thinking, independent voice and critical thinking. So given that context, what would be your key message to students about how to come out of it? Why in the first place, and how to come out of it to engage at this level?
Well, the question is, do we want to be our own person, or do we want to be someone else's person? So the question I've been asking students all over India is, are you thinking your own thoughts, or are you thinking someone else's thoughts? Are you living your own life, or are you living somebody else's life? And unless we are willing to struggle with these kinds of questions, it's inevitable that we are going to be a conditioned robot who's been programmed by someone else's mind. And in that programming, in that conditioning, there's no freedom, there's no real independence of spirit, of thinking, of being. We're not the authors or the architects of our own existence, of our own destiny. We're living out someone else's fantasy, someone else's beliefs, someone else's expectations. We're not living our own life anymore. And so I think everybody who's listening, all the students who are listening, have to decide what kind of person do they want to be. Now, it takes a lot of courage to think your own thoughts, to become your own person. But what I always remind the students in India is that the greatest luminaries of Indian culture and civilization, have been men and women who bucked the status quo, who bucked the system, who didn't care what anybody thought about what they were doing. They challenged everyone, from their own parents to their teachers to politicians, and they really went through a process of questioning everything until they found themselves, until they found God and spirit, and they also found their own independence. And the greatest realizers, the greatest thinkers and philosophers and enlightened beings that India is so famous for were not individuals who just followed along, who just followed the status quo. They were all individuals who bucked the system in every case. And India is very proud of her religious and spiritual heritage. But we have to know what those individuals she's most proud of were all individuals who bucked the system, all revolutionaries. They're all radicals in their own way, who did exactly what they wanted to do in order to find their own truth, and they weren't merely following along in other, and doing what culture was telling them they needed to do in order to fit in, to do the right thing, to please their parents, to please their teachers, to live up to the expectations of their culture. None of them did that.
I think that's a very big message for our students. I would say that a lot of you would relate to the fact that you took science, commerce, or arts because your parents wanted you to take that. So you are just brought up with that, thinking that you suppress your own dreams or thinking just to follow a life of pattern. And same goes for like future decisions about, choosing your life partner or what kind of profession you want to go for. So I think it's very primary step, first of all, to be your own person so you can live your life.
Yeah, and also because India comes from a very traditional culture. So in a traditional culture, you do what is expected of you. You marry who your parents want you to marry.
It's a very duty-driven culture.
It's a duty-driven culture, but the reality is that India is moving from traditionalism to modernism. So India is entering into a new cultural epoch, and we have to, and Indians, young Indians especially, have to take responsibility for the truth of that, and that's a big step. So therefore, because the world is changing that we're living in, we have to take responsibility for the reality of the changes that we're living in the midst of. And one interesting thing is that as we go from a traditional world to a modern world, unfortunately, and this is especially true in India, the greatest gift that comes from a traditional orientation or a traditional worldview is the unquestioned belief in the absolute is thrown away. Because when we enter into modernism, we usually embrace a scientific materialism as our new form of religion. And so when we embrace scientific rationalism and scientific materialism as our new religious orientation, we throw out our own deepest interiors, the deep interiority, which this particular culture is so rich in. And so that's what's something very interesting about someone like me, who's an American, who came to India to find God, to find truth, to find spirit, to find moksha, who went back to the West, who now comes back to India to speak to Indian people, modern Indians, about these deepest dimensions of her own history and her own heritage.
You read my mind, Andrew, and you just go to the next question. So my next question was also about, like West, even Indian society is changing. It has always changed and it keeps changing. And how has been your experience about talking in culture, like in Western culture, where it's very individualistic? And I understand the fundamental aspect of the evolutionary enlightenment that you talk about is also the collective part of it, that doing it collectively, bringing the revolution collectively. So for me, when I read about it, I thought, I was always told since, childhood that this journey is, we come from a very collective society, but when it's about spirituality, it's a soul journey, it's your own journey. So another aspect where I thought, this was a bit paradoxical, that you're talking about doing it collectively and creating a community who evolves together and reaches enlightenment together. So both, the modernizing India, where, there is growing sense of individualism, and West, how do you see this? And, what has been your effort in terms of doing it collective, the experience?
Well, we have to know when you go from traditionalism into modernism, when you enter into a modernistic cultural context, it's really about the freedom. It's about the freedom and the creative potential of the individual. You know, in a traditional culture, it's about the family, and it's about our family and our bonds with our family and our collective. Now the thing is, when we move into modernism and we discover our individuality, we discover the freedom to be ourselves, which is the great gift of modernism and also postmodernism. We discover the freedom to develop and to be our own person, to question things, not merely to do what our parents have told us or what our teachers have told us, but we discover a capacity to self-author our own lives, right? To become masters of our own destiny. This is a very big and important development in the evolution of human culture. Now, in terms of the way we relate to each other, what I'm interested in is something like this, that traditionally, as you were just saying, when someone had an experience of enlightenment or Brahman consciousness, it was an individual, it was an inner, subjective, private, personal kind of experience, kind of recognition. But what I'm very interested in is, if I have that kind of awakening, that kind of experience, that I know that I am that, and you have the same kind of awakening, and you have the same kind of experience, and you also know you are that, then I am the one God and the one Spirit. You're the one God, and you also know that you're the one God and the one Spirit. What happens when that one God and that one Spirit, in the form of Andrew, the American man, in the form of Jolly, the Indian woman, begin to relate to each other in the knowledge that they are both the one God, the one Spirit, the Creator, the energy and intelligence that created the universe, in these individualized forms. So if I know that I am that creative force in the universe, and you know you are that creative force in the universe, and these are merely sheaths or coverings or layers, these are merely vehicles through which that one creative energy and force in the universe can engage with itself, how will that affect the way we relate to each other? How will that affect the way we work together? And it will have a very big and profound effect on how we relate to each other and the way we work together. Because our relationship is going to be based upon the recognition that there's only one and not two. I am and you are that one without a second. In this case, as the creative principle in the universe. And that is going to liberate and empower and energize the way we relate to each other in a very unique and very specific way. And so the collective dimension of evolutionary enlightenment of what I'm teaching emerges when the individuals realize who they really are. That I'm not merely the separate individual who is part of a particular family, but I am the energy and intelligence that created the universe in the form of the body-mind personality of myself. And when I really know that, when it's not just an intellectual idea, but I really know it, and when you really know it, then the way we begin to engage with each other expresses that dynamic freedom and infinite potential of spirit itself. And that gives rise to a new cultural possibility, and that's what I'm very interested in.
That's very interesting, and that leads me to this point about how do we put that in practice in a way that, we see so much conflict in the world where, one nation's attacking another, or even in interpersonal area, I think conflict resolution is a skill that we don't see quite often. And, do you see that, this kind of, personal revelation, how students can understand this aspect of, the consciousness within us, and how they can change their interactions with others?
Well, I mean, the thing is, everybody needs to work for this. This is, in other words, we have to work for it, which means, like what the ancients realized is something very important. The ancients realized it's possible for a man or a woman to become self-realized. It's possible for a man or a woman to become an enlightened person. It's possible to develop in the most extraordinary way. It's possible for this kind of internal, miraculous, higher development to actually happen. Now, today, when we think about higher development, we're talking about studying, physics, science, management, engineering, this kind of thing. we're not right, and then getting a diploma so we can get a good job and make a lot of money. But higher development means studying science, mechanical sciences. But the ancients said, but there are spiritual sciences. There spiritual sciences where if you apply yourself, you can actually develop yourself spiritually. You can become a more complex, enlightened being. That kind of development is possible. So in what we're speaking about, the individuals involved have to believe very much in the potential of higher development. They have to believe that it's possible for human beings to develop morally, philosophically, and spiritually. Right? They have to believe it's possible for human beings to develop morally, philosophically, and spiritually. We can develop. We can become more evolved human beings in this life. We can do it now. We can become enlightened beings in this life if we want to badly enough. So the individuals who are interested have to all share this conviction, share in the belief in the conviction of higher development. I know that I can develop, and you know that you can develop, and we share that conviction. We also put it into practice. We have to learn how to meditate. We have to learn how to transcend our minds. We have to explore these different philosophical ideas, and we have to discuss them. And we have to question together who we are, why we're here, what the purpose of all this is. We have to energetically put it into practice as if our lives depended on it. As it has to become so important to us that we have to experience this conviction that unless we discover these answers, unless we involve in this way, life won't be worth living. We have to bring that much passion to it. But if we can bring that much passion to the inquiry, into the investigation, then and come together in this way, something extraordinary, miraculous, and meaningful and purposeful will happen between us, and that will change everything.
That's, I think, the big message for the day, and I'm sure putting this in practice will eventually make us capable of accepting others who are not part of this conviction, and accepting those who are different from us, because
Certainly.
That's one big challenge I think world and individuals facing today, where we all run out on our tolerance quota probably. So thanks a lot, Andrew,
Thank
for
you very
being
much.
on this program
Thank you.
today.
Thank you very
and
much.
You have given some really big messages.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
SANDHAN, All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.